Good evening. Welcome to tonight's shir, Parshas Kiseitse, Zion Elul. So we have several interesting shilas. First one is that someone called me up last week, and his problem was that the door of his fridge had fallen off the hinge. Namely, that the way doors of fridges usually are held is that there's a hinge at the bottom screwed to the underside of the fridge, and there's another hinge at the top screwed to the top of the fridge, and the door swivels on those hinges. What happened is that the underside of the fridge probably got rusted to the point that it is no longer holding on to the bottom of the fridge, so the door is loose. The thing is that the fridge doors are usually they have a rubber gusset all the way around the door from all the four sides. And that rubber gusset has got a magnet inside. That's what keeps the door of the fridge closed because of this rubber gusset. So his question is, are you allowed to, if the fridge door is empty, the magnet is strong enough to hold the door in place. So this is the question. Could you on Shabbos take this door and offer it onto the frame, and the magnet will hold it? And then when you wanted to take out food, take it off, and basically to open and close the door by using the magnet to offer it to the frame and to take it off when, etc. So actually, I was not keen to give a heter on that, and I'll explain to you why. What I did say to the gentleman is that it's not a huge thing to repair. You could get a metal bracket, either you can switch the door to the other side instead of opening on the left, opens on the right or something like that. Or if that doesn't work, there is a way of using a metal bracket which to screw in to the underside of the fridge and to the side of the fridge instead of having to buy a whole new fridge for such a minimal problem. A few days later, he actually met me and thanked me for the Eitzer Tova, and someone managed to fix it for him. So, but let's come to the shaila. Is it okay to to use the magnet to take a loose door and put it onto the fridge or freezer, whatever it may be, on Shabbos? So we're looking at a din in Hilchas Boine, building, and this you have in front of you on the screen is from Siman Shin Yud Gimel. And it talks about doors and differentiating between doors of portable units and doors of a building. Whereas the door of a portable unit, if you want to put it on without screws, etc., may be okay. Avol delis shel bayis v'shel beir v'dus. A door of a house doesn't mean the front door in Dafka. Any door of a building or of a pit of some sort, a trapdoor. It could be even something which is portable, but it's now fixed to the ground. So he gives an example, a chicken coop. Chicken coop may be portable, but now it's connected to the ground. And therefore, it's become part of what we call building, of the building. And as a result, you wouldn't be allowed to remove or replace a door to anything which is attached to the ground, because that comes under the issue of boine and sais, of building and demolishing. And then he goes on to say about what is seen, which seems to be by large celebrations in homes. They sometimes would take off a window out of the frame, ask a goy to do that. And he says that wouldn't be okay because he says Rabbanon and Shus de Shus, unless it's tire. Go on. And to take this a little bit further, There's regular doors, you can't lift them off the hinge. You have to use a screwdriver to unscrew them. There's another type of door, door hinge, which works like this. It's got a spindle, like a pole sticking up from the piece attached to the door post, and the piece which is attached to the door itself has got like a shaft, a ring, a tube, and the tube side sits on the spindle side, and that's the way it opens and closes. It might even have a self-closing feature by making the meeting of those two pieces of hinge on a slant. And when you open the door, it lifts it slightly, and the very weight of the door makes it self-close. That's a side issue. So why am I going to this arichas? Is that these doors you could effectively lift off the hinge or put back on the hinge without any tools. Would you be allowed to do that on Shabbos? And the answer is no. So the issue of building here is there's it's a piece of a building, and you're connecting it, you're putting it into the building on Shabbos, even if it doesn't involve any uh, any tools, any skills. I'll give you another example. Let's say you have, if you know what secondary glazing is, which means you've got your regular windows, and then you have, in the winter, you have another layer to protect from the cold. And so you've got these windows which fit into a frame, or a fly screen, which has got some kind of catches with springs. Are you allowed to take out and put back such a window or such a fly screen on Shabbos? And the answer is no. Those are all part of the building. So to connect something to be part of a building is also. Now let's come to the fridge. Let's go down on the screen to see if Yud Ches. We said so putting on a door to a chicken coop would not be okay because it's mechuber lekarka. It goes on, even if it's not mechuber lekarka, even if it's not attached to the ground, if it's an item which is 40 sa'ah capacity, and it goes on, another way of measuring is amo al amo, barem gimel amos. It's got the capacity of 3 cubic amo, including the walls, including the thickness of the walls. So then that is considered oihel, and therefore this is not binyan and sira. So here we have the situation of a regular fridge. A regular fridge measures approximately 60 centimeters square. That's the standard size, perhaps a couple of centimeters less. And the size of an armor, according to Chaim Noah, is 48 centimeters. So a regular fridge is comfortably wider and deeper. Overall measurements, I'm not talking the inside. The overall measurements are more than 40. Well, then it's armor al armor. And if it's your shoulder height, so your shoulder height is 3 armors. So an average fridge, I'm not talking about the one which is the counter height, but even if it's not a 6 foot, even a middle-sized fridge, which is shoulder height or more, then that measures 40 sa'ah. And because it measures 40 sa'ah, even if it's portable, it's still considered as if it's mechuber lekarka, and therefore he says you're not allowed to remove the door from it, and by the same token, you wouldn't be allowed to put the door back. So that's my answer, that it would not be okay because it's assuming that the fridge is more than 40 sa'ah overall, then to take off or put back a door would not be okay. Perhaps also to clarify, let's say if it had 2 doors. In other words, a freezer compartment and a fridge compartment. I don't think that would make any difference in respect to our shaila, because we're talking about the structure. The overall frame has got a capacity, has got overall dimensions of 40 so. Therefore, the size of the door is irrelevant. So you wouldn't be allowed to use the magnet idea to put the door in place. Okay, next question we have. So Reuven comes into the mikveh and he brings a bag, uh, and inside it is his towels and film. So it's a regular shoulder bag. Inside is his towels and tefillin. And someone challenged him, why are you bringing your towels and tefillin into the mikveh area? You're not allowed to. It's a disgrace to the towels and tefillin, so to the tefillin particularly. And Reuven says, well, I've had 4 times my tefillin have gone missing from leaving them outside, due to leaving them outside. Therefore, he's so anxious, he brings them in. But so let's take a look at the halacha. So we've got here two separate areas. One is in in Hilchos Tefillin. One is in Siman Mem, and one is in Siman Mem Gimel, etc. Mem Beis, Mem Gimel, somewhere around there. One is about a married couple having tefillin in the bedroom, and the other one is about taking tefillin for persons wearing tefillin. And it used to be in the olden days, people wore tefillin the whole day, and he's walking and he has to he has to stop off and use Beis HaKisei. And what does he do with his tefillin when he goes in? So these are two separate halachas. As I say, one is about a married couple, the other one is about using Beis HaKisei or a merchatz, going to a bathhouse with more details over there. So let's take a look at the first din, where it's Siman Mem, a house, it's a bayis which has tefillin. It wouldn't be okay for a married couple unless the tefillin are taken out of the bedroom or a screen of 10 tefachim is put up between themselves and the tefillin. And then there's a thing about having third possibility, either to take them out or to mechitza, or they're covered with two covers, keli b'teich keli. Elsewhere, we use the term kis b'teich kis. If it's covered with two covers, then that's enough to considered isolated, and it would be okay to leave in the room. It goes into a bit more detail that if both of the covers are miyuched, are designated for the item for the tefillin, that's not good enough. We'd have to have one of them not miyuched. So let's say a tefillin bag, and you can say that what the tefillin themselves are in the plastic boxes. Well, the boxes are miyuched to them, and the bag is miyuched to them. So that still counts as a single cover. But if one of them is miyuched and one of them not miyuched, then that's okay. All right. And then let's read the next paragraph. If you have your talis and tefillin, let's read carefully. You have your tefillin bag and your talis in a large bag. So the large bag is called the keli hamiyuchad. And this is quite interesting that you might have thought, well, it's a bag for the talis and for the tefillin, and yet this is considered a miyuchid, and therefore it counts only as one keli. And therefore, as I said before, this gentleman, we're calling Reuven, he comes in with his talis and tefillin in the regular talis and tefillin bag. That's not good enough because that's kis hamiyuchad. But if he's carrying it in a shoulder bag, which is not miyuchid, he keeps other stuff there. So then that would be okay. That would be okay. Would be kis b'tayich kis. So this halacha is talking about, as I said, in a bedroom. Then we have a separate issue, as I said, going into a Beis HaKisei, etc. And in Siman Mem Beis and Siman Mem Gimel, there's no mention at all of kis b'toich kis. Actually, it seems to be just he wraps them around in his garment, he covers them in his cloak. That seems to be good enough. So what we're seeing is that actually, and the same thing is the Merachet seems to be the same thing, is more lenient than the question of in a bedroom. In a years ago, I looked at this Indian carefully, not mamish this topic, but a related topic, whether it's okay to have Lamala Masora Tfochim. If it's a difference of 10 Tfochim, does that make any difference? And my conclusion there was, it depends on what is the problem. Um, is the Gnai, is it exposing the tefillin to a Gnai, or is it that you are causing the Gnai? So, and that's, I think, also what fits here, the difference between the case of the married couple and the case of Esakisse. That in the first case, the Gnai is something which the person is doing. And there, that projection of that Gnai, it doesn't matter, it doesn't help. The fact that the Kedusha item is covered, it'd have to be Mechitza or a double cover. In the case of the Beis HaKiseh, it's you're bringing the Dover Kodesh into where the Gnai is, but it's not that the Gnai is a human Gnai. There is something, there's a presence there, which is I just say offensive. But there, to protect from that does not need kiss b'toich kiss. So as I'm saying, in the way it's presented in Hilchos Tefillin and about merchatz, talks about covering. It doesn't need to talk about a double cover. So double cover, therefore, certainly does help. Actually, the Alter Rebbe in this topic talks about when you're traveling, and he says with the tefillin, you're allowed to go in with a tefillin into the mokim, the Beis HaKiseh, etc., albeit covered. But with Sforim you should have left at home. Why do you have to bring them with you? Tefillin you're wearing the whole time. Well, Sforim is more machmir, so just covered. But when a person travels, and we know that nowadays you cannot leave your bag unattended for 5 minutes. So when you go, you're traveling, if you're a man, you have with you your talis and film. Even a woman would also have with her a siddur or something, some Sefer Kodesh. And when you go into the bathroom, what do you do with it? So the answer is you rely on kiss b'toich kiss. That has got it, that the Dover Kodesh is in a bag, and then let's say the siddur is in a bag, a small bag, and the small bag is in your bigger bag. Again, you're traveling, you've got a mincha or a small siddur. To take that bag, your travel bag, with you into the bathroom, that is a problem, unless the siddur is inside a small bag, which is inside a bigger bag, and then that would be okay. All right. So now let's take a look now on the margin. The Minchas Elazar, Munkacharov, he has several Sfarim, and one of them is called the Mukha Erachaim, where he's got comments on Erachaim, and he does address this, where he saw people bringing in Galayat on their way they come from wherever they are, their home, they come to the mikveh, and then they go to shul, and he's upset that they're bringing in their talis and tefillin into the merchatz. Now, then, so what he does say, what I've said so far, that yesh l'chalik can differentiate between that which was discussed about Tasha Shamita, which is more chomer, which is mentioned in the Gemara. Mashenkin bringing to the Beis HaMerchatz is more lenient, as I said. So if kiss b'toich kiss works in the case of Tasha Shamita, how much more so kiss b'toich kiss should work for bringing into a merchatz? Then he says there another couple of lines: those who live at a distance, and they come to the mikveh and then to shul. So he said they should leave them outside in the prosder in the hallway. And there's no question. So all right, fair enough. If the person, if it's and that's the normal behavior, people leave their talis and tefillin outside the merchatz. But this fellow who never has had 4 times his tefillin have gone missing, so I would go back to the Iker Hadin. If it's covered, kiss b'toich kiss, then that would be okay for him to bring it in. Right. Let's go on to our next topic, a next question, and that is about mincha on Tisha B'av. So the seder on Tisha B'av is that at Shachris we have after Chazar Hashatz, then there's Kriyas HaTorah, then there's Kinnis, and then there's Asher V'Olotzion, and then straight to Aleinu. Shir Shel Yoim and Kaveh for the Bektoris, Pitum Bektoris, are not said in the morning. They're left for the afternoon, and that's the Chabad Minhag, that at Mincha we start off with saying Shir Shel Yoim, and then Kaveh, and then the Shir Tehillim Hayomi, and then we go into Mincha, starting with Karbonos, then Ashrei, Kriyas HaTorah, etc. So here's the question. Shir Shel Yoim has been adjourned, delayed from Shachris to Mincha. At Shachris, before Shir Shel Yoim, we have Tefillah David, which is not said in the day when we don't say Tachnun, but we have Beis Yaakov Luchu V'Neilcho, and then Hi Hashem Elkeinu Imonu, and then Shir HaMalos. So when it says in Hayom Yom, etc., that at Mincha we start with Shir Shel Yoim, does it mean from Hayom Yom, whatever it is, Sheni V'Shabbos, or does it mean we start off from Beis Yaakov? And okay, so I noticed this year that the Chazan in Armenian has Yortzeit on Tisha B'Av, and he said he started off with Beis Yaakov, so Bocha. So I asked him, where did you get this Hanhaga from? So he says there is actually a Chabad. There's a Chabad publication. Chabad doesn't want to publish a Kinnis, but Chabad Seder Tefillah L'Tisha B'Av, published by Chazak. So in that sefer there, for the Mincha they start off from Beis Yaakov. Okay, so I can't blame the Chazan. He's got a mocker. So I took out also. There's a sefer called Halachos U'Minhagei Chabad, which is taken from the Hiskashrus journal. Every week, the Hiskashrus journal has also, especially Yom Tovim, has got lots of details of the Seder Hayoim. And so, from the Hiskashrus has been those columns have been put together and was published in a sefer about 5 years ago called Halachos U'Minhagei Chabad. So this is on the screen, is from that sefer. So he says this very question: does Beis Yaakov, do you start Shir Shel Yoim from Beis Yaakov? And as any time when we don't say Tachnun, Shir Shel Yoim starts with Beis Yaakov. So perhaps it's included it says to start with Shir Shel Yoim, perhaps it's included for Beis Yaakov. However, he brings from the Sha'ar HaKolel. Sha'ar HaKolel quotes from the sefer called Seder Hayoim, that Beis Yaakov is said as a prayer that Hashem we've davened, and now we are asking Hashem to be Mekabel our tefillos. And that's why we say V'yiyu dvorei eile she'eschananti lefnei Hashem. Mr. Few words, Kroivim bil Hashem, and words which I've expressed, may please, should be close to Hashem. And Shir HaMalos has also got to do with Kabbalas HaTefillah. And according to this, and then he adds now, according to the Alter Rebbe's Nusach, that the day we don't say Tachnun, you finish your Tefillah. That's Shmoneh you said Asher V'Olotzion, you've said Kaddish Teskabel, the word Ein is a typo. Shayech Loimar V'yiyu dvorei eile asher eschananti. So now it's appropriate to say, I finished davening, may my prayers be accepted. If that's the case, that the reason why we're saying those psukim is a tefillah for the tefillah to be miskabel, but then that's appropriate after Shachris, following on from Shachris, but not at the opening of Mincha. It doesn't fit there. Now, yours truly had a different theory, that Beis Yaakov L'chu V'Neilcho is kind of gearing up to you going out of shul. And you're saying, I'm going to go out of shul. Beis Yaakov L'chu V'Neilcho B'er Hashem. And we're going the way of Hashem. And so it's gearing up to leave the shul. And therefore, for that reason, it doesn't belong as an intro to Shir Shel Yoim on Mincha of Tisha B'Av. Now, my question to Rabbi Ginsburg, who put together this, which is on the screen, I sent him an email, I didn't respond yet, is the following. On Rosh Chodesh, so our Seder is, we down Shacharis, Chazaras HaShatz, then Hallel, and then we do Shir Shel Yoim. And we don't say Beis Yaakov, we just go straight to Shir Shel Yoim. What's the reason? According to his svara, well, really daven Shacharis, why shouldn't you be saying a tefillah she's kabel tefillah? So you can say, oh, because I have Musaf ahead. According to my svara, it's much more obvious that Beis Yaakov is only said when you're gearing to leave the shul. Here you still got ahead of your Kriyas HaTorah and you've got a Musaf, so you're nowhere near going out of shul. Therefore, you don't say Beis Yaakov. But either way, as far as Tisha B'Av is concerned, I was more inclined to say that you don't start off with Beis Yaakov, rather you just start off with Shir Shel Yoim, as the Pashto Lashon is in Hairos. Right. So now I have another question given to Osel Yodon about why don't we say Shir Shel Yoim at Shachris and Tisha B'Av? So looking in here in Shulchan Aruch and Hilchos Tisha B'Av, we've got Siman Tov Kuf Nun Daled. Says the Mechaber, Umuter likrois kol seder hayoim. Although we're not allowed to learn Torah apart from a special specific inyanim, we are allowed to read the Seder Hayoim. Parashas HaKarbonos, so you're allowed to read Karbonos. Mishnah Hezel Makoimon, and Medrash Rabbi Shmuel. So those parts of Torah which you say every day, you're allowed to do that on Tisha B'Av morning too. So now, if so, what Shir Shel Yoim and Peter Maktoris is also Seder Hayoim. So you should be able to say them. But then we look at Siman Tov Kuf Nun Tes, where Shulchan Aruch, you can see Sif Daled, about not saying Tachnun, Kriyas HaTorah, then he says not to say Pitum HaKtoris. So Ramo says not to say Pitum HaKtoris. So that's the background of not saying Pitum HaKtoris at Shachris, and I guess Shir Shel Yoim is the same thing. My question about this is the following. In Nusach Ashkenaz, Ramo daven Nusach Ashkenaz, obviously. So Nusach Ashkenaz, on daily basis, it's Asher V'Olotzion, Asher Motzech V'Olotzion, and then straight to Aleinu. Shir Shel Yoim is an optional extra. And Pitum HaKtoris is not said on a daily basis, and only on Shabbos. The reason given, is because Pitum HaKtoris, you're counting the 11 items of the Ktoris. If you get them wrong, it's a serious thing. If you miss out one of the ingredients of Ktoris, it's a serious issue. And for that reason, Ashkenaz do not say it every day, because people are in a rush to work, and they might get it wrong. But according to Nusach Sfard and Nusach Arizal, where these things, both Shir Shel Yoim and Pitum HaKtoris, are said every day before Aleinu, then I don't see the reason why they on Tisha B'Av they are relegated to the after to Mincha when they're part of Seder Hayom. In other words, I'm saying that the minig of not saying them at Shacharis seems to be rooted in minig Ashkenaz and Nusach Ashkenaz, and therefore the question why in Nusach Sfard or why are they delayed till Mincha? I don't have an answer to that. Okay. Our next question is a fairly simple one. Wait a minute. No. This one's a complicated one. Number 6 is a simple one. Okay. What happened here? I'm going to take a look at the chats for a moment. 2 questions here. Screen not visible. Is that still the case? Can anyone tell me the screen not visible? Can anyone tell me? Can you see the screen? I can't. My impression.
I can see it. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
It's visible.
Very good. Okay, you rolled it. So what happened here was last Shabbos, a Chassidish Shid started davening, but he was a little bit verschlafen, perhaps, and he said, "How you do?" and he said, after Mashiach Chanukas, Hashem Melech, and then he said, Lav Nasser Ben Kinois and Baruch Shoma. And then once it's finished Baruch Shoma, I realized, oops, it's Shabbos. Shabbos, I've got about 6 pages of Tehillim to be said, etc. So what do you do now? He'd said Baruch Shoma. Is he now allowed to say the Shabbos extras now or not? That's his question. So let's take a look on the screen. So the first thing we have is from the Ksos HaShulchan. Chaim Noah already raises this question. That we have the extra chapters of Tehillim, which are said on Shabbos before Baruch She'amar. If you forgot and you said Baruch She'amar, do you say them now? Because after all, in Nusach Ashkenaz, they're said after Baruch She'amar. So do you do that, or do you not say them because of whatever concern of hefsek, etc.? So that's where the Reb Chaim Noah leaves this as a suffix. Now, then how did I get to Reb Chaim Noah? I admit I found it through the Piskei Teshuvos. So the Piskei Teshuvos in Simon, it is Reish Pei Gimel, whatever it is, Reish Pei Aleph. So he says the following. He quotes Reb Chaim Noah, but then he says for the Shara Koilel. The Shara Koilel says that the extra chapters which are added in Shabbos, they are Sheruso v'Tushbachto, and they are an introduction to Psikah de Zimra, and you're not allowed to say them after Baruch She'omar, because according to the Girsa in the Zohar, that this was introduced by the Chaverim, by the colleagues of Reb Shimon Bar Yochai, then you're not allowed to say them, these extras, after Baruch She'omar. But according to the Girsa, that they were introduced by Anshe Knesset Agdolah, you can say them after Baruch She'omar, as indeed is Nusach Ashkenaz. So let's just digest what's going on over here. Reb Chaim, the Shara Koiler, Rav Avraham David Lavut, he comes up with the following idea, that why does it Ashkenaz say them after Baruch She'omar and Sfard say them before Baruch She'omar? So he says it's got to do with whether these extra chapters were introduced by Anshe Knesset Agdolah, and that's what Ashkenaz hold, and therefore it's okay to say them after Baruch She'omar. Whereas Nusach Sfard holds that they were introduced later on, therefore they should not be said after Baruch She'omar. And so now I have a question on his premise. He's saying that anything which is post Anshe Knesset Agdolah cannot be said in Psukei de Zimra. Now, I have a question. Who composed Nishmas? When was it composed? So in the Rebbe's Haggadah, it quotes a source that's called the Siddur Kolboi, not to be confused with the Kolboi, which is a Sefer Halacha. Some of you may remember some shuls had these very large Siddurim called Siddur Kolboi, and at the bottom there are notes here and there. And there, in the notes in the Kolboi Siddur, it says a svara that Nishmas was composed with Shimon ben Shotach. And there's a remez to the name of Shimon in the Nishmas, that Shoichin Ad stands for, is the letter of Shin for Shimon, and going backwards, the Nun is the Nun of the name Shimon. I have in my Siddur, I have a Ha'orah to understand the Rebbe's Hemshech. He disagrees with this. But meanwhile, there is this Shmua that was attributed, that Nishmas was introduced by Shimon ben Shotach, who was much later than Anshe Knesset Agdolah. And yet, it's said as part of Psukei de Zimra on Shabbos. So this premise that because it's said wasn't by Anshe Knesset Agdolah, therefore it cannot be said in Psukei de Zimra, and that's the difference between Ashkenaz and Sfard, I'm questioning that. But I want to go a little bit further into this, and we've touched on it last year around this time. It came up, a similar discussion. So here is the Zohar. This is the Zohar in Chelik Beis, Daf Kuf Lamed Zayin Amud Beis. Mentioned about Torah Hashem Tmimo, which is Shemayim Mesaprim, Tilim Yutes. And here we have V'askinu Chavrayo Sheilusa de Tushbachti, that the colleagues have instituted a series of prayer from the praises of David. Okay, and that's the Merel Zadoh Hashemayim Mesaprim. Now we've got two stars here, and on the margin we've got a correction. Anshe Knesset Zagdoila. This was introduced, Anshe Knesset Zagdoila. So we've got two Girsos in this Zohar, who introduced to say Hashemayim Mesaprim Shabbos. In the Pnim it says Askinu Chavraya, and on the margin it says Askinu Anshe Knesset Zagdoila. And in this Shara Koilel in chapter Yutes, he addresses this, and he comes to the conclusion that the girsa of Anshe Knesset Agdoila is, well, the other way around. The girsa of Chavrayik Sherusa, that's the position of the Arizal. That these Mizmoirim were introduced by the Chaverim, and that's why they have to be before Baruch Shama. And he dismisses the other girsa that they were introduced by Anshe Knesset Agdoila. Now, Rav lived, let's say, 100 years ago, 150 years ago. I looked back into the various prints of the Zohar. There were two prints of the Zohar printed in Italy in the years Shin Yud Zayin, Shin Yud Tes. That's before the Arizal's era. One in Cremona, one in Mantua, and they have just the Girsa Eskinu Chavraya, Shedos. But then in the Vilna print, etc., you have both the Girsois. So I was tracing, when was this Anshe Knesset Agdoila Girsa? When did it come in? So I found the first print. It was introduced as Amsterdam Tov Ayin Hey. That's 150 years after the Arizal. And you have here, under 40 years after Arizal, and we have here this Girsa was added. So where do these additions come from? So you check out from the front of the Sefer. They were introduced from a Sefer called Derech Emes. Derech Emes is a compiled list of corrections of the Arizal on the Zohar. So again, this term, this addition, Anshe Knesset Agdoila, is actually from the Arizal. So it's just the opposite of the impression of the Shara Koilel, and the contrary. The Arizal is saying that these extra mizmorim which we say on Shabbos were instituted by Anshe Knesset Agdoila. Now elsewhere, this is what the discussion was last year about Hoidu. And the Shara Koilel says, why do we say Hoidu before Baruch Shama? Because it wasn't instituted by Anshe Knesset Agdoila. But my brother-in-law, Rabbi Alperovitz, showed me a mimer of the Alter Rebbe, and he says Hoidu was instituted by Anshe Knesset Agdoila. And also Mittel Rebbe in Memorim, that Hoidu is also Anshe Knesset Agdoila. It's even mentioned in Masechah Sofrim of saying saying Hoidu. It's not a later thing. Why is it said before Shama? That's a different reason. That's another. You can start discussing that. But both the Hoidu and the additional Mizmorim on Shabbos are from the Anshe Knesset Agdoila. That's the case. So then this whole theory of the Shara Koilel says anything which is not for Anshe Knesset Agdoila, therefore you don't say it after Baruch Shama, all of that falls away. So that's number one, why I felt that it's legitimate to say those Mizmorim after Baruch Shama. Well, we'll see one more card. That is the following. What happens if you are in the middle of putting on tefillin and you hear Kaddish or Baruch Hu or Kedusha? So in the Shulchan Aruch he says, do not answer Amen. Sorry, do not answer Baruch Hu, do not answer Kaddish. Why? Because if you do, you're mafsik between Shel Yad and Shel Rosh. And therefore, when you put on your Shel Rosh, you're going to have to make two brachas. Lohaniach tefillin and al mitzvahs tefillin. You're going to an extra bracha. Therefore, the Shulchan Aruch says, the Alter Rebbe in Shulchan Aruch says, do not answer. Dover Shebekdusha between Shiyad and Shalosh. But then in the Siddur, the Alter Rebbe Paskins, as far as saying one bracha or two brachas, in principle, to say only one bracha. And we do not say the bracha al mitzvahs tefillin unless we were mafsik. Yeah? Then the Alter Rebbe says the following. Although I've told you, normally say only one bracha, but if you heard Kadesh Dusha Baruch Hu, so there between Shayad and Shalosh, mutar lahafsik, v'lanis is emtziv. You're authorized to be mafsik, and as a result, you're going to have to make a bracha on your Shalosh, al mitzvahs tefillin. Ah, you're making an extra bracha. The fisha yesh oimrim. There's those who say Shalosh every day. They make a bracha al mitzvahs tefillin, even without a hafsik. Even though we don't follow that lechatchila, because sofek bracha is lahakil. But here it's a question of gram bracha shein tzricha, that you could have covered the Shalosh with the bracha loniach, and now you've made a hafsik and you have to make a new bracha. No. Kedaihem lusmech aleihem. You can rely on minhag Ashkenaz to always say our mitzvahs, to say you're not going to, it's not a bracha she'ena tzricha, and not to miss out on saying a dover shebikdush. So what we're seeing here is that although we normally don't say a bracha on the Shel Rosh, but when there's a need, he says it's okay to rely on nusach Ashkenaz, on minhag Ashkenaz, and to say and you'll answer kedusha, and you'll say a bracha on the Shel Rosh, another bracha on the Shel Rosh. So I want to use the same svara here. It's true that normally we say these extra chapters before Baruch She'amar, but now that you've missed out, you said Baruch She'amar too early, you can rely on nusach Ashkenaz and say it afterwards. No. On the one, and so now let's take that comparison a little bit more carefully. There is a question of saying an extra bracha. Here it's not even a question of extra bracha. Here's a question: is it a hefsek or not a hefsek? So you can rely on nusach Ashkenaz, it's not a hefsek. You could argue, there it's in order to say of dover shebikdusha. Here it's in order to say the extra mizmorim. But once we know that the extra mizmorim were instituted by Ansar Knesset Agdolah, I think the comparison is reasonably watertight, and therefore I would say, again, to summarize, you said Baruch She'amar, and you realize, oops, I forgot all the Shabbos things. Say it now. Nusach Ashkenaz do it every week like this. You can rely on them for today.
Very good.
Okay. Let's move on. What else do we have? Yeah, so it sounds like a silly question, but someone sent it to me, and so it's kedai to discuss. Are you allowed to use your tzitzis to tickle someone in the ear? You didn't ask. Yeah, I should ask in Chesh Mishpat. Are you allowed to tickle someone? Well, that's not the question here. Are you allowed to use your tzitzis to tickle someone in the ear? So now you have here din in Hilchos tzitzis. Tzitzis tashmishe mitzvah. Tzitzis are an article used for a mitzvah. So they don't have kedusha, but they're used for a mitzvah. Once they've been used, then after the tzitzis have been snapped, then you're allowed to discard them. You're allowed to put them in the bin. I'd say you'd wrap it up respectfully, fine. But what's relevant to our discussion, and that's why I felt it was worth discussing, so long as the tzitzis are still attached to a talus, you're not allowed to use them for a mundane use. You wouldn't be allowed to use your tzitzis to tie something. Let's say you wanted to tie, I don't know, hanky, I don't know what. It's considered disrespectful to the mitzvah to use it for a mundane thing. And therefore, this is the answer to the question in all seriousness, that to use it to tingle someone's ear would not be okay because of Bizei Mitzvah. Right. I have one more question on my list. That's feedback about the Chazan with the Volotzin, which is also interesting stuff. But meanwhile, I want to throw in one other question which came up this afternoon. and this is from a shliach somewhere in Eastern Europe, and they've have an institution. Until now, the kitchen has been a milchike kitchen, and now for various reasons they want to switch that kitchen. They had only milchiks there for perhaps for economic reasons. The pearl now they want to make it into a fleishike kitchen. How do you can you do that? So there's a minhag which the Magen Avraham brings, that generally we do not kasher from fleishiks to milchiks, or the vice versa. The reason being, you've got some cutlery, and today they're milchik, and tomorrow you're going to dip them in boiling water, whatever, for 24 hours. I'm going to be fleishik, and I'm going to keep on switching back and forth. And one fine morning, you won't know whether it's a fleishik today or it's a milchik today. It's going to be very confusing. And for that reason, there is a general principle not to kasher from fleishiks to milchiks. Exception is made for Shavuos to be able to have your cheesecake, etc. Okay, so it's a minhag. It's not a davar chomer b'yoser. And so some say b'shas adchak, you could switch over, kasher to switch over. But here there's another way, which I looked this up. So there's this, as I've mentioned many times, I say the Psukim Shuvas, says Simon Kuf Chaf Aleph, the dinim of kasher and kalim. He mentions another eitzah of making the dish treif, making the not dishes over there, let's say cutlery or metal things, making them treif, and then you can't use them. Then you can kasher them. So I told this fellow, the shliach, if you'd boil a little bit of chicken soup, you got a fleishik pot, so you got a milchik pot, which hasn't been used for a while. And now you put in a bit of chicken soup and boil it up. And now, obviously, now it's become unusable. And then you have to kasher it. Then you're allowed to kasher it. And so that's the eitzah, to make them have a milchiks and fleishiks. And now you're justified in kashering. Right. So what we have our last thing, we had a discussion last week about when a chazan switches over, when two people are serving as chazan. One is taking the omid until after Chazor Sashatz and the Kaddish, and the Chatzi Kaddish. And then for Asher Volotzion, another one takes over. This is mentioned, I mentioned last week. Mishnah Brewer brings it in Simon Kuf Lamed Beis, but actually it's also mentioned in the Ramo in the Hilchas Avelos. We're talking about switching over when two people want to have the privilege of, say, of Damnik the Omed, Nishmas, a parent, etc. So the question was, how does the second one say Tiskabel Sloisoin when he did not say Chazar Sashat? Tiskabel Sloisoin means our tefillah should be accepted. So a couple of people sent me reactions to this. And so one person sent me the following. So someone from Montreal sent me, look in the Ksos HaShulchan. When, at the end of Shemona Esra, when we step back, we step back and we say, Shal Bimroimov, etc. But the Chazan doesn't step back at the end of Chazar Sashatz. But he says, here Chaim Noah is saying, if someone else is stepping in for you, then you as Chazan number one. So why does the Chazan not step back 3 steps? Because after Tachnun, after Kriyas Torah, and after Hashavot Tzion, he's going to say Kaddish Shalom. He's going to take 3 steps back. So he doesn't step back right after Chazar Sashas because he's relying on the 3 steps at the end of Kaddish Tiskabel. But if you're switching over, someone else is doing Kaddish Tiskabel, so then you, as Chazan Rishon, should step back now 3 steps. Similarly, if you, let's say, if you as your Chazan, and in the quiet Shemona Esrei, you forgot to say Yalav Yaveh, so then you have to repeat Shemona Esrei. But if you're Chazan, so you're going to repeat Shemona Esrei anyways. So now your repeat Shemona Esrei is going to be your personal Shemona Esrei. And as a result, for your personal Shemona Esrei, you have to take 3 steps back. So it can be anyone who's acting, who's serving as Chazan, on a Rosh Chodesh, let's say, forgot to say Yalav Yovei, in the quiet Shemona Esrei, he'll going to do Chazar Sashat, say Yalav Yovei, and before he starts Hallel, he's going to say Lekain Tzor, and you're going to have to suffer people nooing and mooing in the background, waiting impatiently. Okay, so that's part of the kapora, I guess. So that's one source we have clearly that the Chazan who takes over Ashavot Tzion is going to be saying the Kaddish Tiskabel, and that's not an issue. Now, then someone from so in America, name is Rabbi Gurkov. So he sends me, he had written something about this years ago. And he says, what do you say? Why are you saying that the Chazan Sheni has to have said Chazar Sashatz? What about my Ma'ariv? There's no Chazar Sashatz there. And still you're saying Kaddish Tiskabel. So what's the Kaddish Tiskabel for? Not for the Chazar Sashatz, but the fact that everyone davened together. So very good. So now then, Rabbi Golem from Sheffield also sent this to me. This is from a sefer called Ishei Yisrael, a contemporary sefer, an excellent sefer on Hilchos Tefillah. And so he discusses the following, and this is a very good question. Let's see, our minig is on Chanukah, an oval stand will take the omid, although Mr. Bird doesn't follow that, but that's our minhag. But it comes to Hallel, someone else takes over. So as you are familiar, so the oval says Chazar Sashaz. For Hallel, he steps away, someone else takes over, and then the oval comes back to say the Kaddish Tiskabel after Hallel. So why is it that there, the first Chazan who said Chazar Sashaz comes back to say the Kaddish Tiskabel? Why can't it be left for the second Chazan, the Rabbi Hallel, should say the Kaddish? Yeah, so this is his question. He quotes from a Rav Zalaznik, who was a prominent Meirei Roy in Yerushalayim. He says, really, the second one can say a Kaddish also, because it's a Kaddish, it's not a personal duty of the Chazan. It's Chayvus Hatzibur. This is Mamish the Sfor, which I said last week. It's a Chayvus Hatzibur. And therefore, anyone could say, and the Tzibur can send someone else to say the Kaddish Eskabel. So he says, even on Rosh Chodesh, it's not necessary, or sorry, Hanukkah, it's not necessary to switch back. Switch back, probably because the old wants to have his quote of Kadeshim. Okay. And then he quotes from Chaim Kanievsky, in which he says, since the second Chazan heard the Holo Chazar Sashaz, then he could say Kaddish Tiskabel. Then he says, V'chidvorov mashma in Shebeis Sheorim, where he says by Ma'ariv, if the first Chazan got stuck, he couldn't finish off Kaddish, someone else can take over and say Kaddish. Now, he says it's the same thing, and really I think it sees this as different. Chaim Kanievsky had said, because he heard Chazar Sashatz, then he says, the Beis Shorim says, well, by Ma'ariv, because there's no Chazar Sashatz there. So, Sinishta Zeklor. One last thing is that I mentioned last week from the Piskei Teshuvos about Ovolet Tzion, that the Gersher HaChaim had said that the Chazan Sheni has to say the Kedusha Ovolet Tzion aloud. And the Piskei Teshuvos had said that Ovolet Tzion itself is a tefillah, and it's got 18 times Hashem's name corresponding to the 18 brachas Hashmona Esra. Now I saw that, I was intrigued. Where did he get it from? He doesn't give a reference. So yeah, I was particularly intrigued. Is there anywhere earlier who picks up on the 18 times Hashem's name in Ovolet Tzion? So my research brought me to the Avud Arham. And so let's read Avud Arham. It says, what is the institution of Kedusha after Shemona Esrei, which is Ovolet Tzion? This was instituted for the Amei Ha'oretz, who came late. And so they came late, they missed Kedusha in Chazar Sashatz. Okay, for the latecomers was instituted a second time Kedusha in Ovolet Tzion. And he quotes the Gemara, how the world is standing on the Kedusha de Sidro and Yesh Mirabah Dagadant. Okay, fine. And that is the reason also, because it's made for the latecomers, then the assumption is they're not so learned. And that's why you have also the translation into Aramaic, because the latecomers are typically don't understand the Lashon HaKodesh, and therefore it was also translated. Then he says, this is a beautiful piece. He says that the Asher Ovolet Tzion unit is like a mini davening. It starts off with an Ashrei. It has a Kedusha, as mention of Tzion, Talmud Torah, as you have, it's similar to the Brocha Me'en Sheva on a Friday night. And it finishes off, I counted, the Abu Darham is writing this 800 years ago, I counted the Hazkoris, how many times Hashem's name comes up in Seder Kedusha, and it's 18 times. So it is corresponding to Shemona Esra. So what he is basically saying is that for the latecomers, there's instituted a mini davening, which starts off with Ashrei. It has a Shemona Esra because it's got the 80 times Hashem's name, and it's got other nice things. It's got Kedusha, and it follows with the Kaddish afterwards. So so this is, well, here we see he's not only saying a number of 18 times, clearly his intention is to say that it is like a Shemona Esra, and that supports what the Piskei Teshuvah had said, like we said last week, that since Ovolat Tzion is like a mini Shemona Esrei, therefore the Chazon Sheni could say Teskabel Tzloisen. As I've said, I don't think it's necessary to take that approach, but I'm happy to take that approach also, that the Chazon Sheni is able to say the Kaddish Teskabel without hesitation. All right, that's what I have to share with you for this evening, and thank you for joining, and I wish you a good Shabbos and a Ksiva v'chasima tov.